So when you're looking at Ramp, if you open the left-hand navigation bar, you'll actually see the Setup Guide button, and you'll see this for the first 60 days post-approval. So when you're looking at this setup guide, you're able to see the various steps that you need to take within Ramp in order to be set up properly. When you look at a specific step, for example, reviewing approval workflows, you can click into Learn More. You'll notice that it opens up a window on the right-hand side. So this window will contain a really short and digestible video up top. What I love about these videos is it not only walks you through how to do it within Ramp, but we also walk you through why you should be doing it and some best practices for setting it up within Ramp when you're doing it. So it really does provide a really comprehensive picture of what this looks like, how it should be set up, and how to actually set it up. When you're ready to get there in Ramp, you can do so by clicking Get Started. You'll notice your progress reflected via this tracker up above. And the reason I like to start my webinars by calling this out is you do not have to interact with this. With that being said, if you're looking to maximize your time and money savings within Ramp, this is going to be your best friend while you're getting onboarded, but also post-implementation. So there's a very strong correlation between customers who are at 100% or as close to 100% here being the same group of customers who are maximizing their time and money savings. That's top of mind for most, if not all, companies in the new year. And so it's a really great resource to make sure that you're taking advantage of Ramp's offerings to help maximize those savings. One little backdoor hack to get here, if you're past that 60-day window, is you can actually put the snippet I just dropped into the chat into the end of your URL, and that's actually still going to allow you to get here even if you're past that 60-day window. So now we'll move back to that left-hand navigation bar and we'll move into the transactions page. So when we're looking at the transactions page, you're able to see your current balance, and how that compares against your total limit. So this might be a bit of a workflow change for you when moving to Ramp. You're probably used to a ton of expense reports coming in at the end of the quarter or the end of the month and not having much visibility up until that point. With Ramp, you're able to actually see what this looks like in real time. You can see if you're getting close to that limit. You'll notice that you can even see pending transactions here as well. So we really do provide you with a comprehensive view. You'll be able to see your next payment date, and that's the date that Ramp will automatically debit your team's account. Even if this falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or even a holiday, we're able to still go in and retrieve those funds. So you never have to worry about missing a payment or making a late payment to Ramp. To the right of that, we'll show your available cash back. So in order to redeem that, you can click into the payments button on the right. You'll notice that we show a lot of the information that we saw on the previous page. So we show the current balance, the next payment date, and then the ability to make a manual payment here. We also show the available cash back and the pending cash back here. And then in order to redeem cash back, you'll simply click this button. You can indicate a dollar amount, or you can just press max. You can review and then redeem. So with cashback, you're able to redeem it against your limit. That is just one thing I always like to preface with is it's going to be redeemed against your balance within Ramp. So in order to redeem that, you will need to have made at least one payment to Ramp. As soon as that first payment is made, you can always use your cashback to redeem against your balance in Ramp. So now when we're looking at the transactions page, like I mentioned, you're able to see your pending transactions as well as all transactions that have cleared. You'll notice that we group them by the date in which they occur. On any page within Ramp, you have your search and filter options up at the top. So you can apply filters to see transactions that occurred within a specific department, date range, dollar amount, your team's transactions only, the submission policy status. So if you only want to look at transactions where the policy was complete or where you had missing or unavailable items, you can apply that filter here. We'll also show you the transaction state. And so this is a quick and easy way to see, okay, what do the out of policy transactions look like? Or which transactions have we disputed? To the right of that, we'll show the receipt status. And You'll hear me talk about this a few times throughout today's presentation, but I'm a cardholder of Ramp myself, and I cannot emphasize enough how much Ramp's receipt integrations, as well as the ability to text receipts, helps in my workflow. Prior to joining Ramp, I will be honest, receipts would linger either in my inbox or definitely in my pockets or my purse for way too long. And with Ramp, I actually just screenshot or text a picture of most of my receipts. I have our Gmail integration set up and we have Outlook coming shortly. But I take advantage of those integrations because now I don't have to create calendar reminders for, the following week or on Fridays to say, okay, let's submit my receipts, let's submit my memos. And it changed from a very tedious, time intensive process that frankly always loomed over my head to one that I just handle in the moment or it's handled for me in the background. So if you are having trouble capturing receipts from your team or capturing memos, feel free to go into this receipt status and see, okay, are we capturing any with integrations? Ramp has integrations, like I mentioned, with Gmail, with Lyft, Amazon for Business, and we have new integrations that are very shortly coming, one of those being Outlook. So we have a variety of tools to make this easy. So is your team taking advantage of those integrations? Are they texting their receipts back to Ramp? I cannot tell you how much of a game changer this is as a cardholder. And so this is just a good way to see, okay, is the team taking advantage of the easiest ways to just get that information from their pockets or inboxes over to you? And then lastly, on the right-hand side, we'll show the accounting status. So the transactions page is going to give you a comprehensive view of all of your unsynced as well as all of your synced transactions. And so you can apply the filters here to refine what you're looking at. At Ramp, we like to give you a lot of information up front and then give you the tools so that you can slice and dice what you're looking at however it makes sense for your business case. So for example, you'll notice that we provide all of the information around the transactions and then give you the tools and filters so that you can refine this list. And you'll notice this on every page within Ramp. So now let's move back into the left-hand navigation bar. And if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, we have settings. So when we're looking at settings, first it's showing us our profile settings. So we can see our name, our role, our location, our email address, as well as our department. A tip here is clicking Edit Profile, and I would recommend adding your personal email address under receipt forwarding. This is really helpful because it'll actually detect your personal email address, and if you forward a receipt, Ramp's still able to match it to that transaction. So I'm based in the Bay Area. When I had a work trip to New York, my United flight receipt went to my personal email address because that's where my frequent flyer account is based from. And I was able to just forward my receipt from my Gmail address to receipts at Ramp, and that matched it for me without having to lift a finger. Scrolling down, you'll notice that you can add a co-pilot. So if you have an assistant or someone who will help you get information from transactions into Ramp, you can add them as a co-pilot here. So now we'll click into approval workflows on the left-hand side. So first, we have the employee card request approval workflow. So when we look at the employee card request, you'll notice that any card request above $0 always requires that individual's manager to approve the request. You may want to loop additional people in when the request meets or exceeds a certain dollar amount. So you can do so by clicking New Approval Layer. First, we'll say if the amount per year is greater than or equal to $500, would still require that individual's manager, but now let's give the option so that either that individual's manager or the manager's manager can approve that request. You'll notice that if you put two people on the same line, that indicates either this person or this person. When we press Create Layer, we'll see that reflected below. If we click into another approval layer, we can say if the amount per year is greater than or equal to $1,000, now let's still require either manager or the manager's manager to approve that, but now let's add a step. Where it says require, you'll notice that we have the option to notify. The difference between these two is that require means this individual needs to approve or reject this request, but they need to do something. Whereas notify means this person actually doesn't need to do a single thing, they simply want to be kept in the loop. So in this case, we might say, and now let's notify our team's admin and press create layer. A best practice here is to use a combination of both require and notify. That way, everyone who should be kept in the loop is still kept in the loop, but you're preventing bottlenecks when applicable. Lastly, let's add a new approval layer and say if the amount per year is greater than or equal to $2,500, now let's require both that individual's manager. Let's add another step and require their manager's manager. And lastly, let's add a third step and require our team's admin to approve that. You'll notice that when we have the different individuals broken into different lines, that indicates first the manager and then the manager's manager. And lastly, our team's admin needs to approve this. If we look at manager card requests, these operate very similarly to employee card requests. So any manager card request, regardless of the amount, always requires their manager to approve that. Just like with employee card requests, we can click new approval layer and say, maybe we do 1,500. Let's still require the manager. Now let's add a step. And instead of notifying our team's admin, now let's notify our team's owner. Where it has require, we'll click notify. One thing to call out is if you want to change the order of steps, you can always move steps up or down or delete certain steps via the trash icon. So if we press create layer, we'll see that reflected below. I know approval layers get a ton of questions normally, so I'll take a quick pause here. I want to see how everyone's feeling. If you have any questions about approval layers, feel free to drop those into the chat. If you feel good to move forward and are ready to talk about reimbursement requests, please feel free to give me a thumbs up emoji. You can either react with it or drop it into the chat. Awesome. Seeing some thumbs up come through. Okay, cool. So now let's look at reimbursements. And first you'll notice that you can allow admins to approve their own expenses. And again, you can toggle this on or off. Next, any reimbursement request, regardless of the amount, always requires that individual's manager to approve this. If we look at setting up a new approval layer, we actually have set this up a little bit differently at Ramp. So we have a very low limit here for $75. And we actually go straight to requiring our team's admin or any of our admins to approve that. The reason why we have such a low limit here is because our team actually tries to keep all of our spend on Ramp cards. It's helpful for a few different reasons. The first being the transactions page gives our finance team an actual understanding of what our real-time spend looks like. So that's a huge benefit. But we also have controls on the card level and on the organization level that we'll go through shortly that really help our team only spend at pre-approved places. We have that control when we're spending on Ramp cards, but if we're doing reimbursements, it can create some fuzzy situations down the line. And so that's why we have such a low limit here, because our finance team is always curious for what the edge cases are. I know we've had at least one team dinner that I was at where it was a cash-only restaurant. That's always going to be a reimbursement, but for other instances, we really do try to keep all of our spend on Ramp cards. So now if we press create layer, we'll see that reflected below. If we look at expense policy on the left-hand side, you'll notice that this page is broken into before spend and after spend. And at the bottom, you can upload your team's policy document. This is helpful because your team always knows where to find the most accurate information. Anytime you update this, Ramp will email all of your cardholders, letting them know that an update has been made and they will need to sign the updated copy. So when we look at before spend, we've already went through approval workflows. So now let's look at spend guidelines. So when we're looking at spend guidelines, first we have out of policy flags. So these are transactions that will still clear, they will still process, But post-transaction, they will require an action to resolve. So let's set up the criteria for our out-of-policy flags first. So when we're looking at general spend rules, we can click into New Flag Rule. First, we'll start by indicating the dollar amount. And so we might want to flag transactions above a certain amount. So let's say that at Ramp, we have a per diem budget when our team gets together for team dinners. With the way our team is currently distributed, that amount should never exceed $3,000. We'll set this for 3,000. We'll select the category, and we'll select restaurants. So you'll notice that when you're flagging transactions, you can flag within a specific category, merchant, or department. You'll notice also when setting up out-of-policy flag criteria, you can see the impact. So this rule would have set flags for X amount of transactions in the last 30 days. This example, we're seeing 0, but you can also see the impact when setting this up. So now when we press save, that means that any transactions above $3,000 where the Ramp category is a restaurant would still clear, they would still go through. So even if we had a team dinner tonight and the total was $3,100 and I was putting my card down, I could still put my Ramp card down, but I'm sure tomorrow morning I would have an email from our finance team asking what happened. From there, they could either request repayment or they could approve the transaction. Below that, we have travel rules. And so this is where you can input your team's travel policy. If you're still ironing out what this looks like, feel free to check out this resource on what a best-in-class policy looks like based on what we've seen from our customer base. You can indicate the type of travel, so the maximum airfare cost and the type of seat the employee is allowed to book, and whether or not that changes based on the duration of the flight. You can also indicate if they need to book their flights a certain time frame in advance. Under lodging, you can indicate the maximum nightly cost for lodging, and again, if they need to book lodging in advance. And then lastly, we have the per diem maximum daily spend. So this covers things like Ubers, lunches, dinners, etc. If your team member does go above this daily limit, it will still go through. They won't need to put their personal card down, but any transaction over that daily limit will be flagged as out of policy. Lastly, let's look at company merchant restrictions. And this is a reason why we try to keep all of our spend on Ramp cards. So what you could do is you can block a merchant, and that's going to block transactions across every single Ramp card your team has with this merchant. So I like to use Airbnb as an example here. So we'll select Airbnb from the dropdown. Let's pretend that Ramp said when our team travels, we're only staying at hotels in the new year, we are not staying at Airbnbs. Even though we've had quite a few emails, a few all hands announcements about it, a flurry of Slack messages, someone is always bound to miss the memo. It's almost unbelievable. But this ensures that even if someone misses that memo and they try to book an Airbnb, that transaction will always be declined. It will never go through. Whereas if they were doing this on their personal card, we wouldn't be able to prevent that. So adding in a blocked merchant ensures that your company never pays that merchant on a company card. This is really helpful if you're moving off of a vendor or if there's any risk that your company money could be spent with a competitor. So now we'll press Save Changes. And now if any one of our Ramp teammates tries to book an Airbnb with their Ramp card, that transaction will never actually process and it will be declined every single time because the merchant is blocked. Lastly, we have automatic alerts, and this is where you can input large transaction alerts for your team. You'll notice that when we look at new alert rule, this looks very similar to setting up an out of policy flag. The difference between these is transaction alerts don't require an action to resolve. You don't need to go in and approve that transaction. You simply want to keep an eye on when spend meets this criteria. So if we think back to the example of having a $3,000 budget for when our team does team dinners, we might want to see, okay, are we getting close to that budget? I might want to set a large transaction alert for transactions above $2,500 within the restaurant category. And now instead of alerting that individual's manager, our owner is the one who's keeping an eye on this, so we'll add our owner in. Now when we have transactions above $2,500, they still won't be out of policy, they'll still go through, but our owner will get a sense for how many of those transactions are occurring. We're a growing team, we're consistently adding new team members, and so we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that and adjusting when needed. Next, let's click into submission and review. So every RAMP card needs to be associated with an expense policy. You are not limited in terms of how many policies your team can create. So I typically see teams have upwards of 2 policies. You'll notice that we have one for general expenses and another for client spend. We might want to create a third for executive spend. So we can click New Policy. We'll say Executive Spend. And now we can indicate what's required on the transaction level. So we might want to require receipts for all transactions. So I would click where it says minimum and select all. We also might want to require memos for all transactions. And again, I would click minimum and select all. The QuickBooks category, let's leave as not required, but you'll notice that if you want to require coding from the cardholders, you can select this and either require it or leave it as not required. And then scrolling down, we have review and enforcement. And this is where we like to say you can give your policy some teeth. So first, you can require managers to review all transactions on cards that fall under this policy. Right now, we're setting up an executive spend policy, so we probably don't need to enable this. But this is really helpful if you have a policy for individual contributors or even greener team members who maybe haven't had a corporate card before. That way, you're able to issue them a card, but you have the proper guardrails in place to ensure that money is only being spent where it should be spent. Below that, we have a feature that I think should be enabled on every single our submission policy, and it's the ability to auto lock cards with missing items. So even looking at this executive spend policy, anytime an executive has a transaction on their RAMP card, they have 14 days to submit the receipt and the memo. If RAMP is missing either of these pieces of information on the 15th day, that card will be locked. As soon as RAMP receives that information, the card is unlocked and ready for immediate use, but it helps teams get information around transactions in a more timely fashion. To the right of that, we'll show reimbursement policies. So you'll notice that you only have 2 here. You have out-of-pocket and mileage. If we look at out-of-pocket first, you'll notice that the field requirements look very similar to what we saw with card transaction policies. The big difference is there's no review and enforcement section, and for the mileage policy, there is the option to require location. Lastly, we have excluded merchants. And so when we're looking at excluded merchants, you'll notice that I've actually already put ad spend merchants in here. So transactions with these merchants will not prompt cardholders to attach receipts or memos. They will always be auto-approved regardless of the submission policy requirements, and they will not trigger large transaction alerts. So I typically see teams put ad spend vendors in here. Typically, they're merchants where you're forecasting large and consistent spend, and you don't want to be bogged down. So I know that I covered a ton of information in settings. Before we move forward, I just want to take a quick pause. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those into the chat. If you're good to go moving forward, feel free to give me a thumbs up emoji. Ooh, and I see some questions around mileage. So when we're looking at, so first we just went through the out-of-pocket. When we're looking at the mileage reimbursement policy, you'll notice that it looks very similar. So in this case, we might want to require receipts. So we can say for all reimbursements. And then the big difference with mileage is you'll notice that we have the mileage reimbursement locations. And in this case, you can either require this or make it not required. So now we can press Save Changes and we're good to go. And you're seeing QuickBooks pulled in because that's the ERP that I've connected the demo account or this demo instance to. With that being said, if you are using a universal CSV to upload your chart of accounts, or if you've connected another provider like NetSuite, Xero, or Sage Intacct, you will see the fields pulled over from your provider. Awesome. So now I'll click back. We'll go back into the transactions page, and now let's actually go 2 tabs below and let's click into the company page. So when we're looking at the company page, you'll notice that first we can see how many people we've invited to Ramp reflected to the right of where it has people. And we can see the individual's name, their role within Ramp, their email address, department, location, manager, spend this month, and if they have a physical card. So you'll notice that I've actually sorted this column from, who our big spenders are. I was being nosy, but you can click on any of these columns to sort them. Just like with any other page within Ramp, we have our search and filter options up above. So there are 3 different ways to invite team members to Ramp. The first is by clicking this Invite People button up at the top. You'll notice that when I go to invite someone to Ramp, I have 4 different roles to choose from. So first, we have the employee role. This is actually the role that I have within Ramp. Generally means that I can request my own cards, I can use my own cards, but I don't need to worry about anything else in Ramp than what I'm doing in it. Next, we have the manager role. This is generally a great fit for department heads. These are individuals who may need to request cards for other teammates. They may even need to invite other teammates to join Ramp or review their teammates' transactions. Next, we have the admin. I would imagine we have most, if not all, admins and owners on today's call. These are the super users. They can issue cards, they can set limits, they can even create accounting rules and modify Ramp company settings. And then lastly, we have the bookkeeper role. These are generally good fit for assistants or even third-party accountants who may need access to activity data to help with accounting, but they don't need to worry about issuing cards or inviting anyone else to Ramp. So now let's click into the role, and you'll notice that I can either copy and paste or type up to 20 different email addresses on this line. So if I am adding more than one email address, we'll do jsmith +1@ramp.com. I were to invite 2 people here. These 2 people would need to have the exact same profile settings below. So they would need to have the exact same manager, be in the exact same department, and be in the exact same location. And I do have the ability to add a card or issue a card upon inviting someone. So this is really helpful if you're inviting one person or a handful of admins to test, but thinking about inviting an entire organization like this, that would be a pretty time-consuming process. So what I would recommend doing is clicking out of this, and I would recommend clicking the 3 dots and taking advantage of our bulk invite options. So first, if we look at connecting an HR system, Ramp integrates with a ton of different HRIS providers. I was blown away the first time I saw just how extensive this list is. And what's really helpful about this is, yes, it helps getting people invited up front. And Ramp is never going to just automatically say, okay, here's every employee, let's just send them all invites. You'll still need to actually select who you would like to invite from your HRIS provider. So there are still some guardrails. But what I think a really potentially even bigger value add here is Ramp is able to look at your provider and see, okay, did anyone change departments or did anyone change locations? And we're able to prompt you to make those changes on the Ramp side, or you can even set Ramp up to mirror your HR provider. So this ensures that a lot of the maintenance and account maintenance work down the line is actually done for you. So if you see your provider listed here, I would strongly encourage you to just check it out. Like I mentioned, we will never just auto invite your team. You will still have to select, but it helps a lot with the maintenance down the line. Next, if we look at the option to bulk invite via a CSV, You'll notice that Ramp actually starts by providing you with a template. So if you don't see your provider listed or just want to sit tight on that for a minute and just get the team invited, you can use this template to make sure that you're not missing any of the required fields needed. You'll notice within Ramp that there's a common personality trait a lot of Ramp folks have where we don't like doing repetitive work. We definitely don't like missing a key detail when doing the initial work up front, having to redo it. And we definitely try to spread that to our customers within our product. And so anytime you see the option to have a template, that's generally a good indicator that there is the likelihood that you may miss a field here. So, if you forget to put the department field, then you would have to go back and do that all over again. So I always just recommend taking advantage of the templates. That way, you'll save some time along the way. It's less of a headache. So once you're finished, you can upload the CSV at the bottom to send out the invites. I see a great question around the chat of, when looking at roles within Ramp, can someone be an employee and another role like a bookkeeper or a card manager? And that was poor wording on my part when I introduced it. But if someone is a role in Ramp, so if we look at the roles again, so if someone's a manager or a bookkeeper, that means that they can do all of these additional things as well as everything an employee can do. So everyone in Ramp will be able to request cards for themselves or, use their own cards. But on top of that, you can add additional permissions, which is where manager and bookkeeper come into play. And then if we click into pending invites, this is where you can check into your pending invites. You can see when the invite was sent. Invites do expire after 14 days, but you can always re-invite someone or you can always resend the invite link. And lastly, let's click into the Cards tab right above the Company tab. And this is going to be where you can actually see all of your cards within Ramp. So you can see how many active cards you have. We have our search and filter options up at the top. Then when we look at card information, for example, we have this work from home card. And you'll notice that this is actually locked. So if I want to see card information, I can click into the card itself. I can see the amount spent against the total limit. Admins have the ability to unlock a card. In this case, I locked it this morning. So I'll just press unlock. We're good to go. I can see that this has a limit of $66,000 and that limit resets every month. So think of Ramp cards like a charge card in the sense that you're saying up to this amount can be spent in this time period. So we've said up to $66,000 can be spent on a monthly basis. And the next limit reset, aka when that limit will be refreshed, is on January 31st at 4 p.m. Scrolling down, we can see the policy the card falls under and any recent transaction information. So we'll show a lot of information on this screen. To create a card, you'll press Create Card in the upper right-hand corner. You'll notice that you have a few different options here. So we place a lot of emphasis on creating vendor or purpose-specific cards at Ramp. And prior to joining Ramp, I, was like, oh, all I need is a physical card. You'll notice that physical cards have a limit of 1 card per employee. And I will be honest, I struggled to wrap my head around why would we need more than one virtual, or why would we even need more than 1 card? And now after being at Ramp, I cannot imagine only having 1 card. There are a few big benefits to having vendor and purpose-specific virtual cards. I would say the first one is if that card information is compromised, it's only shutting one thing down as opposed to every single vendor your team works with or everything that you touch in your day-to-day. So that's already a huge value add that it's only going to potentially shut one thing down if it's compromised. You can also add card controls to ensure that that card can only be used at pre-approved categories or merchants. So if the card information is compromised, your company money is safe because you've set card controls. And lastly, you can have coding on the card level to ensure that your transactions are coded, via rules. So if you're setting up a vendor-specific virtual card, I would recommend doing so by clicking New Product or Service. You'll start by indicating who this is for. And then what's helpful here is, let's say this is a Facebook ads card. Ramp will actually say, hey, check with this person and make sure that you're not spending. Looks like Mary and John are already paying this vendor. What's really helpful with this as well is you can upload the contract or quote so that even if, Mary or John left the company tomorrow, we would always know where to find that contract or quote when it's up for renewal. So you can also create a vendor-specific virtual card via this method. And virtual cards can be added to Apple and Google Wallets, so they can still be used on the go. I've done now a few business trips exclusively using Apple Pay, which I had never used prior to joining Ramp. So it was a lot easier than I thought. Didn't even practice before and had no issues with it. So if we were to create a virtual card, let's say that this is our virtual card for a pilot that we're doing. Let's say, first, this is for Mary. She's running our pilot, and now we'll name the card LinkedIn Sales Nav Pilot. So when creating virtual cards, I would recommend keeping the purpose or the vendor as the name of the card. Even when we're looking at our cards page on the left, it makes it really easy to see, okay, what amount have we allocated towards this on which basis? So we'll say that this is a $5,000 paid pilot. Even if it's a pilot, it's a one-time charge, so it's a total, meaning we don't want this limit to reset or reload. We simply want this limit once. Next, we have auto lock date, and this is a feature I would love on my own personal card. But what you can do is you can say, all right, if this is a 30-day paid pilot, there is no reason why this card should be active after that ends. So we'll have this auto lock on the 18th. You can set maximum transaction amounts. And then we have, I would say, one of Ramp's superpowers, which is category and merchant controls. So if we look to add a restriction here, first we have category restrictions. And so we have allowed categories and merchants, meaning this card can only be spent in these categories, or this card can be spent anywhere but these categories, or we can leave this as none. And then under merchant restrictions, let's click allow merchants. And now let's add a merchant so that the only merchant this card will ever work at is LinkedIn. So when we talked about keeping company money safe, that means that even if this card's information was compromised today and whoever stole the information wanted to go to Walgreens and buy something simple like a, thing of water or a Gatorade, since the merchant isn't LinkedIn, this card will never work unless, the hacker is trying to buy a LinkedIn premium membership. You don't have to worry about your company money being spent where it shouldn't be spent. So this not only helps keep your team spend in line, but it also prevents against fraud. Scrolling down, you'll indicate the submission policy that this card falls under. So maybe this is executive spend. You can add rules on the card level, and then you're ready to press create card. So you'll notice that as soon as the card is created, it's ready for immediate use. The last thing we'll cover today is going to be company programs. So when we're looking at company programs, you'll notice that we have two fringe benefits in here. So we have our education stipend and our wellness benefit. Company card programs are a great way to issue company-wide spend at scale. So if we click the edit icon, we can take a closer look at these. So for example, if we look at the education stipend, we have our program name, the description, and then the thumbnail, and that's going to be the icon. You can issue this card by default for new users, so we'll check that box. And we'll also allow users to request cards for this program. Next, under card basics, you'll indicate the amount and the frequency. You can auto lock this card after a certain date. And then one thing I always like to call out for card programs is please go in and add in some category and merchant controls. So if we click to add a category, let's block quite a few categories. So if we look at the categories, they don't need to be advertising using their education stipend. They certainly do not need to be booking any flights or having a wild Friday night out. Books and newspapers seems actually like a very valid reason for an education stipend, but car rentals, not so much. Car services, not so much either. So you can go through and save these changes. Anytime you update the category or merchant controls for card programs, users will receive an email letting them know the new restrictions. So they won't just, be declined at checkout. They will have, an ability to see what their rules are before spending. But this ensures that if your team were to get audited down the line, that all your ducks are in a row, you don't need to worry. And it just helps ensure that your company money is being spent where it should be spent. So, like I mentioned, card programs are great for fringe benefits. They're also really helpful. We've used them internally for when remote employees go to New York, they actually request their cards from a card program. In addition, if you have a virtual team lunch, this is a great way to issue cards for that virtual team lunch.